thousands of years ago, darkness was more than just the absence of light. It was fear. Every night brought danger, the cold, the beasts, the unknown. But one night, everything changed. A flash in the sky, a burning tree, a discovery that would ignite the story of humankind. Before the discovery of fire, humanity was at the mercy of the night. The darkness brought freezing cold and fearsome predators. There was no protection, no light, no warmth. Raw meat was their only food. Their shelters were made of branches and stones, barely enough to survive the night. To live meant to move, constantly running from danger, chasing scarce food, always uncertain of tomorrow. Without fire, early humans were not the masters of nature. They were its prey. They had never seen anything like it. A great tree struck by lightning, burning bright against the dark sky. The fire danced, it cracked, it roared, and it scared them. At first, they stayed far away, huddled together in silence, eyes fixed on the flames. But something about it called to them. Not just fear, but wonder. Slowly, they crept closer, step by step. They felt the heat, saw the shadows retreat. For the first time, the night was not endless. The cold was not victorious. Fire was warmth. Fire was light. Fire was power. As the flames faded, panic set in. They rushed to protect it, blowing gently on glowing embers, shielding it from the wind. Somehow, they knew. This spark must not be lost, because this fire could change everything. Fire changed everything. With it, early humans unlocked the power to cook. Tough, raw meat turned soft and warm. Easier to eat, easier to digest. And slowly, their brains began to grow. Fire meant warmth, life in places where ice ruled the land. It lit the darkness, stretched the day, pushed back the cold, and it protected them. Predators feared it. Glowing, crackling, alive, the flame became a guardian in the night. But fire was more than just survival. It brought people together. They gathered. They shared stories. In flickering light, voices rose, memories were born. This was the beginning of human connection. The first sparks of culture, of community, and all of it from fire. Fire was more than warmth, it became a bond. Around its glow, people gathered, not just to survive, but to connect. They spoke, they shared stories, they became something new, a community. The flames did more than heat their food. They hardened their tools, turned sticks into spears, survival into strategy. Fire changed how they lived, how they hunted, how they ate. And for the first time, humans began to shape the world around them. No longer just part of nature, they were rising above it. In the flicker of every ember, something ancient was born. The roots of culture, of memory, of meaning. All of it sparked by fire. Fire never left us. It only changed form. What once danced in caves now blazes in cities, in circuits, in satellites. The first spark, struck in fear and wonder, still echoes in every glowing screen, every shining skyline. It gave us warmth, but also time. Time to think, time to dream. It forged connection, community, civilization. The hands that once shielded embers now build towers of light. From the heart of the wild to the pulse of the modern world, fire lit the way. And in every light that burns tonight, we remember that first flame. The spark that made us human.